Greetings GCC and welcome to the 2010 Bible Read-Through. My name is Carey and today we're looking at the book of Leviticus. As a quick review, Exodus we saw where God brought the Israelites up out of slavery out of Egypt to make them a kingdom of priests. Israel rejects that. Instead they disobey, and as a result God gives them laws. They disobey again and he gives them more laws. They disobey, more laws. You can kind of think about it almost as a child who's disobeying. The more he disobeys, the more restrictions you put on him to restrain his foolishness. So we come to the book of Leviticus, and it seems to be that Leviticus displays how a person would end up approaching a holy God if he were to do it on his own terms. But as we've seen in the book of Genesis as well as Leviticus, God's desire is for humanity to come to him by faith. The purpose of the book of Leviticus seems to be that because God is holy, sin requires forgiveness through atonement. You'll find repeated words such as holiness, which occurs over 150 times, fire over 60 times, atonement over 50 times. All these words seem to have to do with making the point of approaching God in holiness, in worshipful reverence. We see the importance of this as in chapter 10, where Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, bring unholy fire before Yahweh, and as a result they are consumed in the fire. Chapter 16 is another important verse in Leviticus. It has to do with the Day of Atonement. It's one of the most clearest examples in the Old Testament of God, of a sacrifice ransoming the atonement for the people of Israel. It's one of the most significant days on the Jewish calendar. What Aaron is to do is he's to place his hands upon the goat, and he is to confess the sins and the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, and then he is to send that goat outside of the camp, out into a deserted, solitary place where that goat is then to die. So we see here, even at the very beginning, there is a foreshadow of one lamb goat who is taking on the sins of God's entire people, and he is doing away with it through a sacrifice. One of the next important chapters in the book of Leviticus, as well as I would say the entire Old Testament, is chapter 26 of Leviticus. I would encourage you to keep your finger on this chapter as you read through from Joshua through Chronicles, mainly because even the prophets will be referring back to this chapter, making it evident that the Israelites are not doing what God said to do. This is a chapter of blessing for obedience and curses for disobedience. And it's so important because within the law, we have a prediction that the law itself is going to fail, and there will be thus a need for a new one. So these are the terms for the covenant. Israel is, you can picture like the land tenants of Canaan. God has brought them in the land. They are to keep the land holy and not to defile it. God is the land owner. If they obey, things will go well with them in the land. God will send rain in the season. He will produce harvest for them in their crops, and fruit will yield from the trees. However, if they disobey, God will turn against them horror upon horror. And there's 4 rounds of his wrath. Round 1, God will send wasting disease among them. He will send their enemies against them, and he will set his face against them. If after all this they do not obey the commands that he laid in the law, round 2 comes. He's going to turn the sky into iron and the ground into bronze. If after all this yet they still do not obey him, round 3, God himself will be hostile towards them. He will bring against them the sword and cut off their supply of bread. And lastly, and possibly the worst round, is the round 4. If they still do not obey God after all these things, they will then eat the flesh of their sons and daughters. And just in case you might be tempted to think that this is hyperbole or a figure of speech used by the authors, keep that in mind when we come to 2 Kings chapter 6, where that prophecy displaying of how bad Israel has gotten in keeping the law comes true. So as we see in Leviticus, this is how a man would approach God if he were to do it on his own terms. But again, as the entire First 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, is explaining God's intention is for man to come to him by faith. But these are the terms of this law for blessings and disobedience. It doesn't sound very fun. And it looks like we're going to need a new law. One where the stipulations are on God's terms and done on his work and by him, not ours. It looks like we're going to have to keep reading. That about wraps up the book of Leviticus. Blessings in your reading. Keep persevering. This is the book where most people, after having committed to read through the Bible, end up stopping. But there are many treasures. And as the author of Hebrews says, even though we speak like this, dear friends, in your case, we are confident of much better things, things accompanying salvation. God bless.